Hey, get inspired, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Life Inspired. As you can see, it looks a little different today. Instead of the red couch, I'm on the red chair upstairs in the Harmony Room at our little Inspired Homes office. But we thank you for tuning in. We thank you for watching. And we ask that you would like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that more people can hear about how and why people are following Jesus. If you're tuning in for the first time, we typically talk about a turning point in someone's life, that life was going along. There was a ... moment that God stepped in and turned them to a new trajectory. My guest today is my new friend, Matt Williams, Pastor Matt Williams. Thanks for being here.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you. So this is your first time on the show, but you've watched a few episodes, so you know a little bit about it. I'm going to ask you first, if you're going to tell me about a turning point story, what would be the background that would set up the story so the people kind of have a little background?
Sure. So I've been a pastor for a few years now, and the very brief background of the story is God calling me from being a family pastor in South Carolina to being a lead pastor in Fairborn, Ohio. And I don't want to give away all the details right now. I have a timeline for you later, if that's okay.
That's great. That sounds great. So tell us, so that's the background. What was your ... What did God do that he stepped in and you knew he was about to turn you? What was that about?
Yes, there's two main things that I want to say on the show today. And number one is that God is sovereign in our suffering. And number two is that he is really good.
Yeah.
Always. So those two things are the two things that I want to say. I have some scripture here I want to read to you and then give you a brief sketch of my ... moment. And then hopefully it'll all make sense in the end.
Certainly. That sounds great.
Good. So here are just some passages from scripture that helped me through my ... moment and helped me live these scriptures and these lessons that God wanted to teach me, which is, again, number one, that he is sovereign in our suffering, and number two, that he is good. Take Isaiah 45:7, for instance. It says, and we have to wrestle with these as Christians. These are tough verses that we have to wrestle with. It says, or God says, I form light, Isaiah 45:7, and create darkness. I make well-being and create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things. And so when a Christian reads that, they think something like, or they're tempted to think something like, well, surely, Lord, you don't mean all things. You just mean the good things that happen to me, right? Like Satan does all the bad things and God does all the good things. That's what you mean here, Lord. And that's of course not what Isaiah and not what God is saying about himself through Isaiah. Take Amos 3:6. It says, is a trumpet blown in the city and the people are not afraid? Does disaster come to a city unless the Lord has done it?
Wow.
And so now all of a sudden we're like, ooh, okay. Lord, does this mean you are in charge of the good things that happened in our life and what we would consider the difficult things in our life, like COVID-19?
COVID-19, hurricanes, fires burning, riots in the streets.
Yeah. Jonah 1:4. We could go on. The Lord hurled a great windstorm upon the sea.
Wow.
And there was a mighty tempest on the sea so that the ship threatened to break up. Who sent that windstorm?
Right. Yeah, I love too when I'm reading the Ten Commandments story, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I see that all the time in that story. God hardened Pharaoh's heart against the people of Israel. Because he was doing something bigger.
We have to wrestle with these things. We have to come to the place in our life where we understand that there is nothing untouchable about us. God even is sovereign over our human heart, is what you just talked about. Proverbs talks about this, that the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wills. I mean, how do we deal with this? We have to deal with it. We have to come to the place in our life where we are humble and broken enough to understand that we are not ultimately in control. God is sovereign, and though that he is good with it. I'll throw out Romans 8:28. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. This verse does not say that all things are good. It says that all things work together for good. So the good and the bad that happen in our lives, God mixes it together in this tossed salad, and he to bring about a certain result, and that result is forming his sons and daughters into the image of his son, Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, we have to
Very
wrestle with
cool.
that.
Yeah, amazing. I've heard the story about baking a cake too. It's the same thing. You put some stuff in a cake that is not sweet, raw eggs, whatever. And then you turn up the heat. Ouch.
Yeah.
It comes out so beautifully.
Yes, God wills it that his children go through difficult times,
Mm.
because that is the means by which that God has designed his ends to form in us. And the end result is that he would one day present the church, his church, the church of Jesus Christ, his bride, without blemish and without spot one day. And there's going to be this great marriage to the Lamb. There's going to be this huge party, and we're all going to get to be a part of it, those of us that trust in Jesus.
Wow.
That's
We're
the goal.
about to celebrate. Yeah, my family's about to celebrate a huge party for my daughter's wedding. So
Yeah.
that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you told us all that. So go back and tell us your timeline,
Yeah.
because I want to get back to your story. I love
Sure.
this. It's awesome.
It's one thing to read these verses on a page. It's another thing to live them.
Sure.
We kind of theologically wrestle with these issues in the Bible as we read these passages in our quiet times. But as you know, Diane, it's quite another thing to walk through them and to live them, and still come to the conclusions that these verses speak of, that he is sovereign in our suffering and he's good. So, yeah, I got a timeline here for you that'll help the audience understand how he led me to where I am. The books that you see behind me, most of them are not my books. Most of them were my uncle Ronnie's books, who passed away 3 years ago. And God used this event in my life to bring me to the place that I am now. So I'll take you back 3 years ago is when it really started. When I say it, what I mean is the moment that God put my wife and I in the fire. He put us in the oven and he turned it up, to use your analogy that you had earlier, and cranked up that heat. And it was to get impurities out of our life and to bring us to the place that we are. So if you go back to July of 2017, that was the first of 4 miscarriages in a row that
Wow.
my wife and I had over the span of time. And so our very, very first one before our son Elijah. So my wife and I have been married for 12 years. We have 4 kids. Elijah's 8, Nathan's 6, Adeline is 4, and now our newborn, 12-week-old, 13-week-old now, Emily Jane, is 0. So there's this, when you sit down to map out your family, you go, okay, we're going to have a kid every 2 years, and it's going to be great. But as the audience can see, there's a 4-year gap in between there, which was part of our story when God cranked up that oven. And so July of 2017 has started off with our first of 4 miscarriages in a row, even though we've had 5 total. Our very first one we lost before Elijah. And so when you start off that way, having kids is difficult already. But when you start off that way, it can be especially tempting to not believe the first thing about God, or the second thing about God, rather, that he's good. We know he's sovereign as Christians, but you can be tempted to think he's not good. So that's July. So in August, 3 years ago, that's when my uncle Ronnie passed away. Ronnie was the pastor at First Baptist Fairborn here for 10 years, I believe, before he passed. And he was walking his dog. You know the story. You've heard it from Susan. Walking his dog and fell over in the neighbor's yard. And the miscarriage was difficult enough. That was the second one. in our life. But when Ronnie passed, God used particularly his passing in my life to start something. It was almost as if something had to end in order for something else to begin. And that's the best way that I can describe it, Diane. I knew that I was a pastor. I was pastoring. I was on the field, to use a football analogy, but I wasn't in the right position, and I knew that. I was delaying uh, being a lead pastor because it was just such a scary thing to me. But Ronnie's passing made me kind of get serious about life, so to
Okay.
speak, and really start embrace the call in which God has really called me to do. So I was on the field. I was pastoring. I was obeying God's calling to disciple people, but I was just in the wrong position, and
Mhm.
I didn't realize that. And Ronnie's passing really was a get serious, Matt,
Wow.
moment. And so from then on, I started to be open to that idea. I thought being a lead pastor was something I was going to do when I was 50. It's when you're a little older, you're a little more seasoned, and God said no. So again, so July 17, first miscarriage. Ronnie passed in August. I was serving in a small church in Fort Mill, South Carolina, TGK Baptist Church, a church that I love dearly with all my heart, still to this day, love dearly. And I was one of two full-time pastors. The lead pastor at that time, he had his own story, and he felt the Lord telling him to step down and resign in October. And so you have July miscarriage,
Oh,
Ronnie passing in August, and then in October, my lead pastor resigns because he felt the Lord telling him to do so, and he was obedient and listened to that. That's significant because, again, I was the only other full-time staffer at the time, and our church was going through a very tumultuous time in church. If you've been involved in church life for more than 10 minutes, you understand that the church can be a difficult place sometime. Uh,
sure.
the church is just basically a bunch of sinners saved by grace. You put 200 people in the same building, and
Right.
it can blow up sometimes, and God allows it to happen for his sovereign purposes. And so we were going through, and our family there at the time, a very difficult time. So you have personal life is being turned up in the fire, and church life is being cranked up in the fire. Um, I asked our elders at that time. I said it would be a bad idea to hire an interim pastor. Let me preach. Let me do this. I know that I haven't been here long. I had been there about maybe a year and a half, couple years at that point. I said, let me preach. They prayed about it. And that following February, around that timetable, they said, and I've been preaching ever since he stepped down. I was in a rotation of preachers, but then by the time February rolled around, they let me kind of full time step into that lead pastor like role.
But
The church
in
knew
interim, right?
only in the interim, and so I was the family pastor, but I was also the lead pastor. But again, I was the only pastor, and
Right.
so it was a confusing, challenging time for us in our church. The month before that, January, we found out that my mother-in-law, Ashley's mom, was diagnosed with cancer, and so this is just continuing to crank this up here. The heat's turning up in my family. And so we're praying for her now at this time. Um, so I just keep preaching, and we keep trusting in the Lord. The elders entrusted me with a great favor. I kept preaching through all of these things. Our church was still just doing this and just fighting within. Uh, and it was a very difficult time. And I was the only pastor there to try to navigate this, and I was brand new at this lead role, not really sure what to do, not sure what God was doing. Lord, what
Right.
are you doing with me?
Right.
What are you doing, Lord? I remember going for walks, Diane, just pacing up and down the street. This was like before the service was starting. I'd be pacing a bit. Where's the pastor? He's out walking or something. And I'm just crying out to the Lord, saying, Lord, what are you doing? Who am I to Moses stuff? Who am I to lead these people? They're not
Right.
listening to me. Why should they? I'm a young man. I was 34 at the time, and I just started shaving yesterday, right? It's in their eyes. Who was this kid, preaching? And I said, Lord, surely you have someone else for this to lead them. And he said, nope, I got you. You're the guy right now. And so deal with it. And so that's basically what he did. And I said, okay, I'll keep preaching. Well, that following July, so now we're in 2018, we lost the second of 4 miscarriages in a row. And that was the most difficult one because that was the 14-weeker. I mean, we had given this baby a name by then. We had, we were thinking we knew what the gender was, even though we really didn't. But we had given him a name, and we were just devastated at that point. I asked our elders for 2 extra weeks of vacation after that second miscarriage, and they graciously gave it to me. And we stepped away, and with the question in mind, should we come back? Like we were emotionally just spent at that time. So it had been a year since Ronnie had passed, and I was praying about my next step. And the elders knew that. I let them know this. It was in full transparency. And I was thinking about applying at FBC Fairborn, but God clearly said, no, you're not in an emotional state to go anywhere. So I said, Lord, what do I do? Do I step down here in my current role? Since I can't apply anywhere else, what do I do? And the Lord said, keep preaching.
Wow.
Just keep preaching. And so that's what I did.
To yourself, what did he have you like? The sermons would be like speaking right to your heart.
That is exactly what it was.
Wow.
I mean, I remember stepping on stage to preach, and the church was still going through a difficult time. And the sermons that I was preaching, I was going through First Peter. I did Jonah for a while, and Jonah is being just destroyed. He's like, God, I'm not going to Nineveh. I don't even want to preach these people. And if I'm honest with you, Diane, that was going on in my heart too. The church was in such a bad place, and I was in such a rough place emotionally that I was like, God, get somebody else. Like, don't send me to these folks.
I'm not your guy.
And so I'm preaching, the Lord hurls a great windstorm, and the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and the Lord appointed a shade tree to come up over Jonah, and then he appoints a worm
to kill the shade tree
and eat the shade tree. And Jonah's like, just kill me now. Oh, and so it wasn't quite that dramatic, but the point is that God is sovereign over everything. Is the point of the text. And Jonah just sits eastward of Nineveh on top of the city, overlooking the city, and just waits for it to burn. And he just can't wait. And of course, God ends up, in his comedic humor, he just ends up saving it, completely saving it. And it was about this time that God started turning the church around. And we went through, before God called me to Fairborn, we went through a year of just blissful, just happiness. And God ended up turning that church around. And they have a great pastor that's leading them now. But, so the church knew about these things, about our difficulty having kids. And we went through 2 more miscarriages just really early on, 5-6 weekers, a couple more of them. And we were like, Lord, are we done? Are we done having kids? Is this it? At what point do we stop this craziness? And, what's going on here? Well, if you fast forward to July of 2019, we stepped away for vacation here to Ohio to see my Aunt Susan, to see her and other good friends in the area. And I kept in touch with Fairborn over the years. I was an intern here 11 years ago, a youth intern. Oh, wow. And so, Ronnie, let me come on for a summer in between my seminary days. And I just kept in touch with the church over this whole span of time and loved this church. It was like a second home to me. Ronnie and Susan were here. And Ron and Susan were never able to have kids. Right. And so Ronnie and I got very close. He was my best friend and my pastoral mentor in life. And so when I lost him, I was kind of lost just directionally and just emotionally. And, we ended up coming up here after the funeral. I got to do the funeral. And we took all these books back to South Carolina. It's the funny thing, not knowing what God was doing. you know, uh, and it was wild. So so now we're in July of 2019. I know, almost all the members of the search team. It almost wasn't fair in a sense. Like they were my friends. I knew them. They knew me.
Right, right.
I pastored their own children when they were in the youth group 11 years earlier.
Wow.
So we just kept in touch and we knew these folks, and there was already a level of trust there. And so that July of 2019, I ended up meeting with the chair just informally. Just, hey, I'm in town. I'd love to see you. And he's like, oh yeah, no problem. So he met at Susan's house. We sat under the pavilion out there, and we just talked. And hey, where are you at, Dr. Oliver? And he's like, yeah, we're still searching for a lead pastor. It's just been a difficult search. People, we think we have the candidate, and then it just doesn't work out, either on our end or his end. It just, something happens, God's sovereign, right, to where it just doesn't work out. And I'm just sitting there listening, like, it's interesting. And he goes, so where are you at, Matt? And I was like, I'm kind of searching for a lead pastor role, honestly, that God's calling me to. And both of us just sat there in silence. I remember this awkward silence for about a minute.
Wow.
We just sort of stared at each other and kind of not knowing what to say. But I think both of us were thinking the same thing. And at least I like to think that he was thinking what I was thinking.
Are you?
Yeah. And so, like, what do we do here? And so, at that time, they had 3 or 4 candidates left. Long story short, all of them backed out. Like they
But
just
they
for
didn't have any other candidates.
and
Wow.
so I called him a few weeks later and I said, "Hey, I know this is crazy. Can I apply?" And he said yes. And so I applied, and God left them with one resume on their desk. It had been, a couple of years since they've had a pastor at this time, and that they haven't had a pastor, and so they were looking, diligently searching for one. I applied and said, let's roll the dice, let's see what happens here. And so that was in July. By October, I was preaching in view of a call here at the church, and by December, God had relocated us to Fairborn, Ohio, and now I get to be the lead pastor in a church that my beloved uncle, my just a man that I loved and adored, and he was my pastoral mentor. Got to move all the books back in his office, and so here I am sitting here, and in his old office. And one cool story I'll share with you about God's goodness in his what he was doing with me in my moment. I did not know this when I applied, but one of the set in concrete criteria was that the church wanted a man with 10 years experience. And when I applied for the job, I had 10 years and 3 months of experience.
Wow.
And so check this out, Diane. Had I applied the year before, which I was thinking about doing, but remember, we had just had the second miscarriage and we were not in any emotional place to go anywhere.
Right.
We were
You would have had to.
considering leaving the ministry.
Right.
I mean, we were done. And so, had I applied then, they would have rejected my resume because I had 9 years of experience at the time.
Right.
So God was doing something and said, keep preaching. And he was waiting. When I turned in my resume, I had 10 years and 3 months of experience. So and so they ended up calling me, and they had all these doctors, doctor this, doctor that, 20 years experience, 25 years experience. And all of a sudden this kid comes in, and, the nephew of Ron. And it's just, who could dream this up? Who could cook this
Right.
up? And then the following June, on Father's Day, June 21st, Emily Jane was born. And so Ashley and I, Ashley came into this role, and she was expecting, and she was just starting to show, and people were giving her looks, the look you give when you think, someone's showing, but you don't really want to ask them yet,
Right.
And it was, yeah, God blessed us with another little girl, and she's doing great. And I've been here about 10 months now, and it's going great. And God is sovereign and he is good. Those are two things that I want to share with the audience. And God was just doing something and working, and I didn't know what, but if you hang on, if you're going through that in your life right now, I want to share with you, if God's got a purpose. He has a
Absolutely.
purpose for you.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, I have to thank you, Matt, for sharing. I'm just so grateful to hear the whole story and all the details. And I want to tell our viewers, I know that some of you are touched by this, and some of you are struggling through stuff. I mean, on the day that we're recording this, just yesterday, my dear friend had like, boom, one bad thing, boom, another bad thing, boom, another bad thing. And I'm like, wow, she sounds like Job right now, because just so much going on.
Yeah.
And so like any viewers, you guys, if you want to get in touch with Matt, we will hook you up. So just message us here, whether you're watching from YouTube or Facebook, or from the lifeinspiredshow.com is another place, then you can message us that way too. So any one of those places, message us, we'll get you in touch with Matt, and he would probably love to counsel you, maybe have a virtual coffee. Unless you're in the Cedarville, Fairborn, Ohio area, then you can meet him for live coffee.
There you go.
With masks on.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. Y'all have a great week. Bye-bye.